All right, welcome everyone to today's episode of the EDI Catalyst podcast series by C2MCI, the Carbon to Metal Coding Institute here at Queen's University. For any new listeners tuning in today, we talk in this podcast series about equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigeneity in STEM, featuring guest speakers from diverse backgrounds and perspectives discussing their lived experiences, as well as providing some resources and tips on how to create more inclusive and equitable environments. Through this, we hope to inspire you all to become a catalyst for change in your own communities and workplaces. A few notes before we get started. After the live session, the podcast video will be shared on our YouTube channel. If you prefer to remain anonymous, please remain muted and your camera off. There will be time at the end of the session for members of our live audience to ask questions, so please remain muted until then, or you can put any comments or questions in the chat as well, and we will review at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand off to today's host, Sara Cheema, and I'll let Sara introduce herself.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. I'm a PhD student in the Credit Lab, and this is my second podcast I've been hosting. And I'm very, very excited to have Dr. Sarah Styler join the discussion today on her experiences with ADHD and STEM. Welcome, Sarah. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. I have a bit of a cold, but other than that, I'm good.
Oh, that's good. So before we really get too far into the podcast, I just really wanted to define ADHD for some of you in case you're unfamiliar. So from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, it identifies ADHD as a neurodevelopmental disorder defined by having impairing levels of inattention, disorganization, and or hyperactivity/impulsivity. There's several different types of ADHD, and actually they can vary with different symptoms like poor time management skills, lack of trouble multitasking, excessive activity, and different hyperfixations. While coping with each of these types of symptoms tend to build like remarkable resilience, creativity, and adaptability skills of people with ADHD. And a lot of people with ADHD do see a lot of different types of success. With that, we'll kind of continue on with the podcast. So Sarah, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your career path thus far?
Sure. So I did all of my degrees in chemistry at the University of Toronto in environmental chemistry. I chose environmental chemistry sort of with a bit of a coin flip between environmental chemistry and evolutionary biology, which are obviously actually quite different. So I would say that I wasn't sort of predisposed as a child to go this direction. I just kind of made a choice, as many of us do in undergrad. After or in between my master's and my PhD, I worked for a year. Wait a minute, I can't remember anymore. A year at an art gallery in the UK at the Tate Gallery in art conservation science. And actually, between my bachelor's and my master's, I took some time off as well to work in alumni affairs and fundraising. So I've had kind of a number of different things. And then after that, I did my postdoc as per usual and started an academic position at the University of Alberta. And then in 2020, I moved with my research group to McMaster University, and I'm currently an assistant professor there in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So our experiences, I also have ADHD. Our experiences with ADHD are a little bit different. I was diagnosed very early in life, and actually Sarah was diagnosed a little bit later in life. So the kind of the first question to kind of help lead things off, what really drove you to even like want to be diagnosed with ADHD so late and everything? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I had no idea I had ADHD. I just thought I was sort of chronically unable to do things that other people found easy, but really had no language to even think that there might be some sort of organizing principle behind my disorganization, I suppose. And so my diagnosis came about really by chance. I was avoiding writing a grant application, which I was stressed out about, and I was, doing anything other than that. And I was on Twitter actually, as sort of a usual time waster, and discovered someone mentioning their ADHD diagnosis. And then so instead of doing my grant application, I thought I would do the diagnosis just to waste time. And then I realized I had it based on the criteria. It was just completely obvious to me. And these criteria were criteria that I'd never even considered in any capacity before. So it was less that I sort of sought out a diagnosis. I mean, I did seek out an official diagnosis, but I just knew the second that I saw the different sort of symptomology and things like that, that it was obviously what sort of was an organizing principle for how I was existing in the world, I would say. So by chance, I guess. I mean, I think this kind of thing is super common for I guess disabilities or other diagnoses faced by women. You just kind of keep going to the doctor forever and forever and say you have these problems, and then it just gets shunted in some other irrelevant direction, I guess. So I found out myself, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I feel like kind of that kind of COVID era kind of got sprung up so much different,
Yeah.
kind of like looking within and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when we were chatting in another meeting, you kind of discussed some really interesting points that I just wanted to bring up of like what ADHD really like manifested for you in academia, both like as a grad student, as a postdoc, and as now a PI. So could you give like a few examples of how that really manifested for you?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of positive things. I have no shortage of new ideas, research interests as a grad student as well. And I think the sort of I don't know what the word is, the limiting factor has always been sort of my ability to carry out these interests. So I'm always just brimming with ideas and possibilities. But as a graduate student, the idea of being able to complete all of those tasks and ideas was very daunting to me. As a faculty member now, that aspect of my job I find great because I can have students come in and I always have an idea of something for them to do. And then also conveniently, I don't have to personally do it, right? So it works out very well. I'm more of an ideas person. So in terms of challenges, I mean, a lot of it I'd really sort of self-accommodated for. I had all these systems and structures of ways of doing things. When I was taking classes, I used to just memorize everything because that was sort of the only way that I could organize the thoughts in my mind. Um, I would always fall asleep in class, including really small classes, like embarrassingly small classes. I fell asleep once when someone was training me on how to use instrumentation. I was also standing up at the time, so it's kind of unclear how this happened. And I just found that I couldn't keep my attention together. And then along with that were things like the associated feeling of, embarrassment, like how can I possibly not stay awake during this? This is ridiculous. Why am I being such a child, And and things to do with organization have always been the issue. When it comes to supervising students, there's been a lot of stuff to do with keeping track of different students' projects and things. And I've sort of mitigated that to some extent by moving the majority of our conversations to I mean, of course, I still talk to my students, but the majority of organizational discussions are now through our group Slack channel or workspace. And I find it's a lot easier to have things there to remember them. So it's kind of like this combination of, me having put in place all of these different tools and ways of thinking about things and carrying things out. And then that was really just disrupted during the pandemic for reasons that are obvious to most people. I think the lack of structure, the lack of sort of daily accountability. So I don't know if that sort of answers your question. I think there's a lot of different ways that it's manifested, I would say, for me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can definitely relate to like a lot of the kind of embarrassment from the kind of in
Mm,
intention sometimes. And then also like this lack of like actually being able to look back at what you said and be like, okay, this is what I instructed and stuff. That's definitely
mm,
what I can relate to. Um, so a huge symptom of ADHD is like procrastination.
mm,
And that's definitely what I kind of struggle with the most. If there's no deadline, like really hard to get there. So what are some of the strategies that you really use to kind of like overcome this throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I would say that prior to my diagnosis, I didn't use any strategies to overcome it. I would just do things at the absolute last possible second. And I think that was one of the reasons why I found the PhD program so challenging, is because it's a 4 or 5 year period of with really not very many markers as you go along it. No, I mean, there's markers in terms of course passing a candidacy exam, finishing your courses, but the research itself is sort of this vista in front of you that you need to fill with tasks. And so I found that really challenging. I would say now, in terms of the procrastination end of things, I have been working with an ADHD coach to talk about ways to break things down into really tiny tasks and to do those tasks. And I do find that helpful. I have some accountability partner kind of activities that I do. Um, I think I'm not necessarily that much better at it than I was before, but I have sort of, maybe I just don't feel bad about it anymore. So that has been very freeing, I would say, because as you sit down yet again the night before a deadline, typing furiously, thinking, why have I gotten myself into this mess? At least now I know, I think. So,
Mhm.
but that does take it does free a lot of mental space, I think, to actually do the task at hand.
Yeah, for sure. And I personally find like there's no better like there's like if it's not last minute, I'm less efficient with my time as
Oh,
well.
sure.
Like when the pressure's on, that's when I can get the absolute most work done before even if I prepared beforehand, it's like the crunch time is really when I get things
Yeah, I
super,
used to
super done.
actually, prior to my diagnosis, I always used to call it going into turbo mode, actually, because I used to
Yeah.
sort of disappear. I'd put on music on repeat and just go crazy and just get it's almost like it's a different version of myself, that productive version. I look at stuff later and I'm like, that was pretty good, what I wrote with zero time left. But I do think that now that I'm sort of realizing that that's sort of the way I work best, but I don't necessarily think it's the way I would produce my best work. I don't think. So, it's very, I think the stuff that I produced has obviously, provided me with success. I mean, I got two faculty positions before I was diagnosed, right? But there is like a really big personal cost with all of this. If I just say to my spouse, sorry, turbo mode, and then just sit here. I mean, I have a child at this point, so I can't just sort of sit there with my headphones on for 2 days like I used to. Nor do I really want to, although it is like kind of gratifying to see the pages fill up with text. But yeah.
Yeah, I find after I kind of leave turbo mode, there's like a huge crash associated.
Oh
Like I
yeah.
can't focus. I can't focus on anything for a couple days.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's always kind of like the tougher kind of give and take with the kind of fixating, I guess, would be really
Yeah.
that type of thing.
I think also
Um,
on the topic of that, I think that that is kind of the reason why some of the why I found ADHD more debilitating in my sort of adult independent career, because I used to, if you have a whole bunch of exams and assessments and tests and everything else, and lab reports, etc. I mean, you actually don't have the opportunity to procrastinate, or if you do, it's over a very short time period, and you have other stuff to do anyway. So it's kind of like the whole structure keeps you in line, I would say. And I thrived in that kind of high structure environment, and then when I started my faculty position or my postdoc or grad school or whatever, you sit down at a desk, someone says, here's your project, bye, right? Like that kind of thing is not the kind of scaffolding that I need in order to succeed. So I've kind of had to create it myself, I guess.
yeah, and on the point of like kind of like structured, especially like graduate kind of studies and PhDs, how would you recommend like it could like a structure that could be ADHD friendly for like a PhD graduate program?
Yeah, so I think I've been doing a lot of thinking about this because I've given some talks on ADHD in academia and things like that recently. And, when I was in grad school, I don't know what anyone could have done to make it easier for me in the absence of a diagnosis, because I just think that in the absence of a diagnosis, it's, oh, well, you can take a bit longer on that, or some sort of time-based accommodations, but that's not actually fixing anything. So I think really what would be very helpful would be for supervisors, people in kind of managerial roles, to think about, like, what are the essential job functions, if we think about a PhD as a job, what are the essential job functions that someone has, and what makes a good student? And when I've asked this question to various groups of people before, the things that come up are, very self-motivated, very organized, very punctual in doing the experiments, very conscientious, all these different things, able to set a schedule and keep to the schedule, and the vast majority of those things are not really anything to do with the science or about the sort of cognitive abilities. Those are sort of executive functioning skills that actually have nothing to do with the job, right? And so I think it's possible to have very frequent meetings with students outlining very frequent tasks and check-ins, and obviously not doing the work for the student, but providing some sort of scaffolding for them to kind of organize themselves through. And I don't think that diminishes the work associated with a PhD. I think it just makes it more equitable, because um, the amount of time that I spent trying to plan things and think about things, and then change my mind, and then rush through it and make a mistake, and then et cetera, et cetera. I just huge amounts of time wasted. So I think that maybe thinking more broadly about what does it mean to get a PhD, is probably the way to go here, which feels kind of like radical, a radical way of thinking about things. But, it's only recently that I even considered writing, checking off the "I consider myself as disabled" box on, different grant applications. So it's been a real, I don't know what the word is, um, change in how I'm seeing things as well, because I'm kind of reluctant to say, oh, well, why should I have to tell you what to do every 2 days, or why should I have to have this level of oversight? But I think that's a really unkind and inequitable way of thinking about things.
That's such an interesting perspective. Yeah, I think the scaffold idea is really good. And even like just doing that kind of like at the beginning of your PhD program, showing like what the structure could look like for carrying out so many different things would be extremely helpful. And then kind of letting the person kind of run with it after they're really used to kind of that, adapting to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so is there anything in particular that you do to like that have impacted you the most as a graduate student, postdoc, or faculty, to help like accommodate your ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, experience?
Yeah, sure.
If you,
Yeah, I'm definitely coming at it from a much different perspective than you, because to me
yeah.
uh it's sort of like I'm fast tracking this whole this accommodation thing, because I was only diagnosed when I was 37, and had all of my grad school and postdoc and first 5 years of a faculty position behind me. Now, I'm doing things that I think for some people would seem really, really obvious. Like, I have a calendar. And I know that most people have calendars. Like, I'm aware of this. But I've just never sort of been able to sort of put in practice using one. And so and I realize this makes me sound like some sort of alien here, being beamed in from space, like, I know it's ridiculous. And so now I have a calendar, so that's good. And I use it so that I know when a meeting is going to happen. Because what I would have done before is I would have said, oh, I know I have this podcast coming up and I know it's soon. And then every day I would be sort of like, oh, is it today? Is it tomorrow? And then I would have to, like, I don't know, just remember or something. So calendars are great. And also I
Yeah.
think the main thing I'm doing right now is I have all of my different sort of domains of to-dos listed on a really simple, Word document. And every day, this came up through talking with my ADHD coach, I have this 1-3-5 framework that I use, where, I decide what is the most important thing I need to do today, and then I do it. Or in theory, I do it. And then, the 3 sort of next most important things, and then 5 kind of small things. And the size of the 1-3-5, the size of what fits into each of those categories, can change depending on how I'm feeling on a given day. And so, if I'm really not feeling so hot, then maybe the 1 is something that would be a 3 or a 5 on another day. So basically, the goal is to try and always keep moving forward. Not because I have sort of like an endless productivity mindset or something, but because it's more from the perspective of, being kind to future Sara, because like the work's not going away, right? So maybe the kindest thing to do when I'm feeling not so great is to just work a little, and then I have less to do the next day, rather than saying, oh God, I can't take it. I'm just going to, take the day off, because then I come back and I have twice as much stuff, obviously. So those are kind of the things I'm doing at the moment. I'm also, really just disclosing things to students who I work with, like, you need to remind me about A, B, or C, and, and really just not seeing it as a sort of personal failing in the same way that I would have used to see it as. So it's a combination of practical things and then kind of reorienting how I think about my career, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so I'm just blanking here on the next question. Um, just a second. So with the kind of like deciding the most important thing, like another part of ADHD is that actually
Oh,
assigning
yeah.
the priority to the most important thing. So how do you
Uh-huh.
even like kind of like figure that out or like characterize that based on like
Right. Yes. I mean, I guess it's um sorry, the square thing with the 4 different quadrants of tasks. So there's the like urgent and doesn't matter task, which always takes up all of our time. There's the not urgent and doesn't matter task, which actually we don't really have to do. And then there's the, urgent and important. And then there's the not urgent and important. And so that one, the not urgent but important, is certainly where I've fallen behind, because eventually, the not urgent and important shifts up to the urgent and important, and then creates a lot of panic, right? So I'm trying to just do the things that I don't want to do, which I realize is, because it's very easy to have a big checklist and check everything off. But if you're not sort of moving something forward, if I'm not, reviewing a student's manuscript proofs or something, they eventually have to get done, and I'll just feel worse and worse about it, right? So I'm trying to just, I think it is like a thing about being kind to future self. And that's a way of reframing it from being like, oh, I have to be X productive. I have to be this. I have to have a perfectly clean house. I have to have blah, 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 blah. But it's more just, what level of cleaning and house cleaning, like, or tidying of my professional or personal life do I need to do in order to not be more or less miserable, right? I think it's kind of that way of thinking about things, which I found helpful, of that reframing, I think. Um,
yeah, that's great. So we only have a few minutes left. If anybody has any questions for Sara, we're really happy to take some. If not, I have more questions as well.
yeah, definitely happy to take questions.
I can
I have
ask.
a,
Oh,
sorry, I couldn't raise my hand, so I'm going to raise my hand on the screen if I had a question.
Sure.
Just thank you very much for that. Can I ask, I think you mentioned, for a long time you didn't click that disability
Mm.
when you're applying. Is there still a stigma around that? Is it just people, or do you feel that you're not entitled to? I'm just trying to understand that reluctancy now. I know that there was stigma
Sure.
a long time ago, but is that still there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so, yes, thank you for asking that question. I think for me, I mean, a lot of it has to do with when I was diagnosed, and the sort of delay in checking the box, I think, came about because I hadn't quite mentally assimilated, I think, the extent to which this ADHD is intertwined with most slash all aspects of my way of existing, I think. So, at the beginning, I would think about the really obvious things like, oh yeah, this is why I procrastinate, and then it kind of has been like, oh yeah, this is why it takes me 20 minutes in the shower because I like can't keep myself on track, or this is why I can't leave the house on time, or a whole bunch of other things that ways that it's affected me. And so, I think that it's less about like a stigma and more about me not realizing actually how disabling it is. And I think like there's all this sort of discourse around, ADHD is great, celebrate all the differences, from the sort of neurodiversity standpoint. And I think it is great. And I think that different people feel very differently about these things. But I can tell you, if I'm trying to, leave for work and it's taking me 45 minutes to get my stuff together, like it's unclear to me how that is beneficial to my existence. And so there's a lot of aspects of things that I really do think are like actually disabling, right? And anyway, so yeah, I don't know, I guess I just hadn't thought of myself that way, I think. So it's more of a changing of how I'm seeing myself in the world, I suppose. And the ability, and I think also, sorry, I have feelings about this question, but I think also, because so much of ADHD, at least because it was undiagnosed, a lot of the behaviors and activities actually manifest as like things that are like disorganization, and they kind of look like you don't care, and they look like you're not on time because you don't respect your students and things. And so it felt sort of like, oh, well, can I really sort of say that this isn't my fault? And I think that is hard to do, I think. Yeah. So that's my answer. I think it's a really good question.
Well, thank you for that. That's actually helpful. Just for having worked with some international students in my time as director of the International Center, I brought up the word stigma because culturally, it is a stigma. So I know, depending on your culture, where you come from, that it is still seen that way. And I think that thought process does need to change a little bit. And a lot of them, even though they realize it, would still be afraid to put their hand up and say, I have this disability. So just, I think culturally, that's something slightly different there too. Thank you.
Right. Oh, I'm sure there's additional dimensions to all of this that I don't even think about as a white woman, growing up, very close to where I'm currently working, and not move across countries and the rest of it, for sure. But yeah, it's good that you are thinking about those things when talking to students. However, though, even just having anyone who has an inkling about this type of stuff is helpful, when students are going to talk to university administrators, etc.
Thank you. Thanks.
It's interesting because I have a completely different opinion. But this is just because I've been diagnosed earlier in life. I still don't check the disability kind of disabled box, mostly because like because I was diagnosed so much earlier, like I have been able to completely remediate a lot of the kind of typical kind of like management skills, etc. throughout my life. So I don't view myself as a disabled person, but I just can't pay attention very well all the time. But yeah, that's great. So we have time for one more question, and then I have kind of a final question for Sarah, if there's no other ones.
I can jump in, Sarah, and ask a question. So I relate to a lot of these conversations. One question I wanted to ask, so you got diagnosed after your PhD and later in your career. And you talked about some things that you do to help you now and things that people can do, but what helped support you through your PhD or grad studies when you were undiagnosed? Like, did you just kind of power through all of that on your own, or was there anything that kind of helped you overcome these things even when you didn't realize that you had ADHD?
No, I just kind of powered through. I think, and it was, I think that part of the challenge, I think, is that, we've moved towards this like discourse, I guess, surrounding the PhD that, the PhD is really hard and everyone finds it hard. And the problem is, unless you actually parse out what the hard means, then I was left thinking, oh, like I find this really hard, so everyone finds it hard. But I can guarantee that not everyone in my wing of the building was, writing data on their hands to remember it and, leaving bits of lab notebook like floating around places, so no, I didn't really have any. I mean, I had a supportive supervisor in a general sense. Like I had a pleasant working environment. But all the pleasantness in the world can't sort of like make you have executive functioning skills. So, I'm like really curious if I went back now to grad school, like I think I'd be like kind of killing it, like, because you know, because I was just so bad at it. And I mean bad like in the doing of it. I had ideas, but like the carry out and the organization and the number of times I had to repeat stuff, like God. So yeah, I mean, I think that the if we sort of categorize it by like number of papers or something, you know, I had 4 first author papers, and like I would have had, I don't know, like way more because I spent all my time doing nothing and then, you know, and like worrying about it. So, yeah, so no, I just powered through. It was
I
brutal.
think that's a really good thing to bring up, because I think we always talk about grad school being hard, but yeah, hard can be different for different people, and someone's hard might be extra hard because of a mental disability that they're not aware of. So I think that might be a good point to leave people on too, is
Uh-huh.
if you think that you could be struggling more than the average person, maybe it's worth checking out and seeing if there's something else going on, so that you can get the support that you need earlier on.
Yes, I fully encourage this. I mean, if there's anything that like me, you know, chatting about all these different things, I think it's kind of depressing that we're still at this state of awareness about ADHD, that, you know, someone coming in and talking about it, you know, can possibly affect change for people to, you know, to carry it forward through their networks and whatever. Like, you know, we're not fully aware, I suppose, of it as a condition. But I think yeah, it's important. I mean, you know, if you're finding grad school really hard and for reasons that you can't quite figure out, you know, then maybe there's something else happening. Like, you know, basically, I guess what I would say to people, you know, who are here and are maybe talking to other people, if you find yourself saying things like, because this is my perennial refrain, like, you know, your friends, like, what is my problem? I can't get my shit together. Like, if you ever have that type of discussion going on and you're always baffled by people who can just do things without it being an issue. I mean, I used to say this about my friends all the time, like, why can't you just do things? You know, why is everything so hard? You know, that then that's sort of like a indicator that maybe something else is going on. Because it doesn't have to be that hard. I think that's the thing. But it doesn't, because there's ways that it could be addressed, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For sure. So we'll finish off with our kind of last question.
Sure.
So Sarah, what is your favorite element on the periodic table?
Oh, right. I'm remembering that you told me this was coming.
Yeah.
I think I said titanium, actually, because one of the first projects that one of my first graduate students did when I was at Alberta was looking at chemistry of different titanium minerals in the environment. And actually, the reason why I like the paper so much is because it sort of systematically dismantled a lot of the work I did during my PhDs. I thought that was very
Uh,
you know, in that it was showing that things were a lot more complex than my initial papers had suggested, which I'd always suspected, but it was kind of gratifying to prove myself wrong, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's awesome. So I hope everybody has kind of like my first discussion with Sarah. I was thinking about it for days. So I hope all of these different things have kind of left you guys, everybody thinking. So again, I'd just like to thank everybody for listening, and we'll see you for the next podcast.
Thank you so much. This was a really lovely part of my day. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.